For clarification, this is track 1. If you're looking for the marketing program, it's in the ballroom. We're going to be talking about how company culture and efficient operations can improve your bottom line. Talking about employees, talking about other issues on how to grow your business and do well by your folks. My name is Lawrence Miller. I'm a brewer by trade. Not a lot to do with the forest products.
Biomass.
Other than having biomass, my main goal is to ensure that all of you have a good end of your workday after it's a safe workday. Along with that, I was Secretary of Commerce for the state for a few years, and that was 2011 to 2014. It's the very start of the Working Land Enterprise funding that came in, and I was talking to Commissioner Snyder at lunch today. The difference in the forest products industry and outlook right now, just being here for a couple of days, the difference in optimism and engagement compared to then is just really remarkable. And I just wanted to commend you all on the transformation that is clearly happening, the openness and the improved communications. It's really cool because it felt kind of dismal back then, to be fair. So what I'd like to do is start by asking each of our panelists to spend about 10 minutes talking about what then brought them into the business, what turns them on about it, and what have been particularly important tools to use. So Andrew, you arrived last, so why don't you start?
Fair enough. My name's Andrew Pierce, and I own a small woodworking shop in Tassville, Vermont. Technically, we're in the town of Heartland, but we're in between Beachy and Woodstock. I think I'm going to go back about 17 years. I started working for my family business. My dad is Simon. He has a glass company in Vermont. And I started working out in our family business. And I did all sorts of different jobs there, as you do in a family business. Just about everything. And about halfway through that process, I got connected with VMAC, the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center, and got really excited about efficiencies and processes and figuring problems out, problem solving. And so I went to a Lean 101 class, and at the time, Simon Pierce was kind of on an upward trajectory as far as glass-making companies go in the world, and most of the industry was kind of falling apart. And so I'm sitting through this class up in Burlington, Vermont, and I got about halfway through the day, and I went up to the instructor, this gentleman named Paul, and I said, Paul, this is all really interesting, but we are a totally unique situation. Like, nobody else does glass making the way that we do it. And he looked at me and he goes, Andrew, you're right. You're really special. You're just like everybody else. And that was a very humbling experience. And so I sat through the second half of the day, and I just got totally hooked into what it was all about. And basically what I came away from that first class was that it doesn't really matter what you do. It's when you work on efficiencies in manufacturing, it crosses all boundaries. So if you work in a restaurant, right, you take a raw material, vegetables, you cook it, and you still serve it to somebody. If you're an accountant, you take numbers, you adjust them around, and you create a spreadsheet. If you're in woodworking, you take a log, you make it into something, you add some value to it, and you sell it to a customer. It's always the same, it's just how you do it. So the processes and the techniques can be applied to anything, and that's what really got me into it. I said, okay, now I've got a set of tools that I can use and make things better. So I continued on at Simon Pierce for another 5 years and ended up introducing Lean to the entire organization. I think we trained about 200 out of the 300 people that were there in the last couple of years. And I had all these great ideas about building companies and doing things, and my dad and I were kind of on different wavelengths about that. He's like, you're not quite ready to run a business of this size. And he's right, I wasn't. And so I said, well, I'm going to go start my own business. And I started Andrew Pierce Bowls 7 years ago. And we are now the largest hand-turned wooden bowl company in the world. And a lot of the lean practices that I learned when I was working with Simon Pierce, we implemented in our company. And I think that's kind of the beginning of my story. So.
Okay, I'm Jennifer Fraser. I'm with Appalachian Engineering Flooring in North Troy, Vermont. I have sort of similar experiences, except I'm sixth generation in the wood industry. First, obviously, in our group. So if anybody was going to follow tradition, I would have been stuck in that revolving industry, I guess is to describe it. But what had occurred is actually at our mill, we started in 2012, and at the time I was just hopping in and out as a technical director. And my whole career literally has been, okay, where's the problems? Send Jennifer there. That was my whole career, the 18 years was problem solving. So what had occurred essentially was we weren't succeeding. It was a really difficult time. So what happened was that at the time we had about 15 employees. I was losing between 1 and 3 employees per month. We couldn't get past this 1 to 2 month sort of safety record, if you call that a record, and it was stressful. It was a very stressful place to work. I remember Colin Miller walking from the Northern Forest Center, and he was trying to get this the Wood Skills Force Initiative started, and I said, why? We can't even keep them. So at that point, he said, well, I think I have somebody who can help me. So we started with Jeff Howe at Dovetail. And then with him, it was nice because, you feel when there's so much tradition in this industry and how we manage our people, that essentially I was that crazy girl. It was nice to know that I wasn't crazy. Literally, he was saying, no, the direction that you want to go is the way you should. And so I was finally allowed to, because everything was falling apart, to go whatever direction I wanted. So I was given the freedom, essentially, to start to change things. Within 4 to 6 months, workforce stabilized, and then we brought BMEC in also. At that point, essentially, we started to see the financial gains with the company. We started to be able to retain and attract people because our reputation started to change. All just basic things from communication to open cultures for innovation, things like that. Once we were able to retain our employees, the really neat part about it, everything was on my shoulders. So what we started to do, we created a culture where everyone was engaged, everyone contributed. And what it helped is that now I had 25 brains doing the work, and these are brilliant workers. Like we've shifted from workers to manufacturing professionals, and that's something this industry is lacking to be to attract people to our industry. I said before, fifth generation. My son's laugh at me when I say talk about a horse. So that's where the passion comes from. Is that it's not going to be continued in my own family, this tradition. And I think that's where a lot of people in this room have the same experiences. So once we started the turnaround and things started going very well, the first part of the lean experience, we actually didn't have capital investments at that time because obviously we didn't have the money. So what started to occur is we started to see these financial gains. And within 18 months from the beginning of this journey, we were actually started on a track where we were able to put about $1 million back into the company every year to be able to, and that's cash. So it went from being extreme red to being able to invest back to capture the growth that's in the engineered flooring industry. So that's where we're at right now. Now we're set with a new challenge, and luckily I have BMEC helping me again, where we're in extreme backorder scenario. So we have the quality, we have the product. we're still able to deliver to the customer 96% of the time and within 2 weeks. So we're not, in that area that we're in trouble because we're in that part of the back order. But the whole experience, the amazing part about it is it really was simple principles. It's not anything like rocket science. It's just treating your people with respect and creating that trust and open communication. I remember going to the president and presenting to him that, hey, we're going to post our profit margin. The employees are going to know. That was an interesting discussion. Because it needs to be that open communication and have that is not traditional. But it's been an amazing journey and it's going to be an amazing one going forward. And over to you.
All right. I thought this was a full-time panel. And we'll get to that?
We'll get to that.
Okay. So I'll make mine quick. In many ways, it's more about you guys than us. Everybody has experiences and challenges, issues with their businesses. And so some of it, I think, is going to get into, the meat of it's going to get into when you guys ask us questions. We don't have all the answers, but I think the group probably does. Has some pretty good answers. So let's see. I too am fifth generation out of the timber industry, all based in Wisconsin. 12 years ago, I was working with a mill in Georgia. I was living up here, but working with a mill in Georgia, shipping pellets overseas. I should say I'm Chris Brooks. I own the Vermont Wood Pellet Company. And at that point, things were great. We were moving a lot of pellets. It was a 125,000 ton facility. They wanted to grow, and the decision was made. I was either going to invest in that business or build a mill up here in Vermont. Through a number of iterations and one final meeting with one person, I decided to build in Vermont. When I decided to build in Vermont, I knew Vermont was a little bit different than Georgia. And so we did a study, just a situational study to find out what's Vermont want. And what we came away with was, we studied both what the communities want, what the end consumer was going to want, just what do you want up here? And we were struck by the fact that we were going to have to build a mill that produced about 15 to 20,000 tons, not 125,000 tons. So everything was going to have to be tighter. But it was community scale. And subsequently, I've discovered Vermont is an amazing place for entrepreneurs to build a company. There are so many things available to you, and so many resources that aren't used. It's incredible. And so rolling forward, we had to do things differently here. The first thing I had to do was figure out how I was going to build a mill. When we discovered that it was going to be a smaller mill, but it was also going to be a community scale mill, we started looking at locations fitting that model. In essence, we went from, and by sticking to what Vermont wanted, we went from no mill to a mill that was producing pellets for sale in 9 months, which is pretty fast. And it worked. I mean, since that point forward, it's been pretty much a good news story. But the biggest challenge I had when we first started was there are no cost accountants up here. I mean, this was 12 years ago. Remember the Great Recession? That's when I opened my mill, and there just wasn't anybody who could help me with my cost accounting. I turned to Sustainable Jobs Fund. At that point, they were doing something called peer-to-peer. And they brought in a whole group of people, one of which was the CFO for Butternut Mountain. And he hooked me up with a person who was a cost accountant, lived in Wyoming and in Vermont. And we hired a young girl right out of accounting school, and we made her into a cost accountant. That's the way I had to do it. But, and subsequently, we've gone through all sorts of iterations with help from outside groups to the point where now we've been profitable. We were profitable in our third year. Our employees, we are open book. We are profit share. We pay 100% of their health care, and I give them enough pellets to heat their house. It's not a bad package for these folks. But that's all through outside groups coming in, looking at what we do and saying, okay, there's different ways to do things. There's better ways to do things. So, on the employee front, right now, it's a challenge for everybody with employees, I think. On the operational side, we, again, have outside groups come in to help us with our operational, doing audits, breakdown audits, for example, so that we can understand where breakdowns were occurring and where those breakdowns were occurring, why are they occurring, what's happening, and how do we get back online as quickly as possible. We put together a program where, if a sprocket has a 12-month lifetime, change it to 11. Don't wait. You got to keep making them. I mean, I produce pellets 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. I can't stop. I mean, my demand exceeds my supply. So I've got to continue to work and continue to operate and make pellets. I guess my point is the outside help that's available, especially to small business, it's amazing. I mean, this is an incubator state. And if you're suffering problems, there are a lot of people out there that want to help. In fact, it's their job to help. And most of them are probably, it's free help. It's people who will come in and do an analysis and say, okay, this is what's wrong. They're paid by the state, and they're going to help you get back on track to where you need to be.
So you talked about the needing to be making pellets 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. But all three of you talk about very intentionally working on the business instead of that day to day. How do you get to that point where you recognize you needed to do that? And what works for you? What techniques do you use to get yourself to make sure you continue to do that?
I don't know if I could tell you the day that I started working on the business instead of in the business. I got there by hiring a really good team and really empowering them and letting them make mistakes and being okay with that and being open and talking about it. And the team ends up picking up, like you were saying, the jobs that I was doing. And sometimes it's as simple as asking somebody to do something. I found myself a little while ago ordering all the supplies and ordering all the materials and doing all of this stuff. And I went to one of the guys who was slightly underutilized, and I said, could you help me with some of the supply ordering? He's like, yeah, I'd love to. I'm happy to help you out. Great, that's one less thing that I have to do that he's perfectly capable of. It means trusting him, and that's okay. And I think he appreciates the responsibility. He has a company credit card. That's a big deal in a small business. It's a risk. I guess it's a little bit of a liability, but as a small business owner, you take risks every day. It's just which ones are going to make you grow quicker and which ones are going to slow you down. And so I try really hard to do that with everybody on the team. And if you do that and you ask for the help and the support as you're going along, then it frees you up to step back a little bit and look at the big picture and figure out what direction you want to continue going in, I guess.
I have to say the day that I met Jeff Howe from Dovetail was the day that it clicked in my head that micromanaging was not necessarily the style that a company should be managed. However, that's taught a lot in business. And then from that point, making sure, like you said, that the culture that people aren't afraid to make mistakes, that they don't get reprimanded or afraid of being fired because they're trying. People come to work every day wanting to do a good job. If people don't understand that, then they're not going to think. It's not a culture of reprimanding them. It's encouraging them and enabling them and they want to grow in their career and take on different things, whether it's purchasing or whether it's becoming an operator. You know, they want to have that succession in the company. And there are some people that do outgrow our companies and move on. But I'm happy to see that. And that's not a normal view. People, if they get a good operator, they want to keep them and change that machine because they produce the most. But that's not necessarily the best thing for them or our company.
My come to Jesus was when I was looking at I was tracking our production, and there were some certain spikes where our production went up. So I wanted to figure out what was going on during those times. And I realized I was gone. So I decided 10,000 feet was where I needed to stay.
Very good. Jennifer, you mentioned safety from the forest floor to installation. This entire industry has components that have, let's just say, higher than average workers' comp rates, and it's that way for a reason. You know, and this raises a bigger question, not just the workplace safety, culture aspects, but, you know, preparing for the unexpected. You were talking about how to make things go better, but sometimes there's a disaster, and how do you get ready for that? And what do you do when you have to recover? And Andrew, I was in your folks' place shortly after Irene, and what struck me was that after all of this destruction had come through, you know, you're still in this pile of silt, a perfectly happy, unscathed bowl, and it's just how random is that? But it was a great example of, boy, just don't know what's going to happen. You got to plan for it somehow. So did you talk about that?
Talk about the disaster
Well,
part.
the disaster and what you from that, or from any disasters. I mean, I think you had a little fire and.
Not a little fire.
You know, knowing what you know now from each of your business lives, what do you think is important from a planning perspective and a response perspective to be successful coming out of something you can't really plan for?
So in our situation, the Simon Pierce flagship store is in Quechee, Vermont, and my parents bought that building in 1981, the same year I was born. And we lived in an apartment upstairs for the first 4 years until my parents had enough money to build a house. And when I was 2, we were upstairs one night, and the glass furnace downstairs caught one of the beams on fire. And so I started disaster planning when I was 2 because I got pulled out of the building and taken across the street. That was the first fire we had in that building. We've had another one since then. The Irene flood actually took out 2 facilities in the same storm. We had a facility down in Brandywine, Pennsylvania, that got 4 feet of water in it. The mill in Quechee got 55 feet of water in it. 3 floors went underwater. We've also had a facility in Maryland that had a roof collapse because of a snow load situation in a part of the building where nobody was working. And I guess in my situation, I've grown up in a family that's had a lot of unfortunate situations, and we go after every one of them the same way, which is, okay, we had something bad happen, let's fix it, let's try and prevent it from ever happening again, and move on. And it never doesn't stop us, it doesn't change anything, we just keep going and we work through it and we move on. I'm in a situation right now, one of the other things that I didn't talk about that I think is important to bring up during this conversation is one of the things that makes us uniquely competitive in the wooden bowl business is we don't use the same tools that everybody else uses. I like either buying machinery and customizing it to make it work better for us or building things from scratch. And The one area that I'm nervous about right now that we're in the middle of doing is the core of our business is a coring machine. So we take a block of wood and we can cut a bowl out of a bowl out of a bowl out of a bowl. And it's not something that I invented, but it's a machine that we have that does it. I designed it, and we had it built in Vermont. And it took me about a year to build that machine. And if we had a fire in my building right now, that would be the one thing that keeps me up at night, because we'd have so much lost productivity so much lost sales before we could get that back up and running again. So we're in the middle right now of designing a new machine to replace that one. And as soon as we do, I'm going to take that one, I'm going to bubble wrap it, and I'm going to put it in a different building somewhere else. There's things like that you kind of need to plan ahead for. And if there's something that you can't just buy off the shelf, then have some sort of backup plan, some sort of a backup. Right now, if we had a big problem, I could get us back up and running pretty quickly. I mean, I was put in charge of the cleanup after the Irene flood in Quechee, and we had the facility back open 14 days after the flood. And it took us 2 years to finish the recovery, but we had the store back open, and we were sort of coming into the foliage season and couldn't lose that business. So it took a long time for the complete recovery of it, but there's a short-term plan, a medium plan, and a long-term plan. And I remember very clearly showing up the next morning, I looked at my dad and just kind of said, well, I guess we have to clean this up. And that was the attitude. It was, we kept all the employees on board, and anybody who wanted to could stay and help with the recovery cleanup process. And we're looking for this to get it done.
Engagement.
Well, we've been lucky as far as fires and flooding and things like that. The only thing I find, for some reason, with brought in south of Pennsylvania, I don't know why people like shooting trees, but essentially, when you're have a molder hitting, metal, there's, some sparks that do occur. So anything's been very small scale. But the thing is, as far as I have to think, when I first arrived there, I'd have to classify our safety issues as, it's not a large-scale disaster, but, it definitely was a challenge. And the thing is that the people at the time didn't have that attitude. They thought they were invincible. They didn't, the coworker wouldn't stop them from doing an unsafe act or things like that. But the recovery over the time, as we had people, when we're talking about the people engaged, it was their attitude. Exactly that. Is that when we have problems, when we have a major downtime or something that goes really wrong, that's out of our control. And that's essentially move on and work on the problem and go from there. And that's kept the workforce happy. It's created an environment that isn't as stressed. And when you have that base of people, if something big disaster does strike, they're all going to pitch in and keep going again quickly.
We've had a few fires. In the first one, we were down 2 weeks. The last time we had a fire, the fire department showed up. They didn't touch a hose for 45 minutes. At the end, they grabbed a hose and they essentially told us the fire was out. The difference being, every time we have an incident, everybody involved, first of all, we take care of the incident. Then everybody involved sits down and we say, all right, why did it happen? What caused it? What can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And then when it does happen again, how do we make sure we can mitigate the damage much quicker and fight the issue? And with that sort of thought process, with engaging the employees, as I say, the last time it was, we really haven't suffered a huge incident, thank heavens. I mean, I don't pay my guys enough together in any case. I mean, it's nobody was paid together. So planning ahead is, but looking at the incident and saying, how can we do this better, has been really helpful.
And this is a discussion format too, so I want to make sure I look over my shoulder. If there's questions or comments that people want to add at any point, just raise your hand or raise your voice, either one. the technology, the rate of change of technology is impressive. And somebody yesterday, or maybe this morning, was talking about even the high level of technology involved in forestry operations out in the field, never mind increasingly sophisticated plants. What are you experiencing from employees coming into the business and in recurring training in the need for development and capabilities around some of the technological innovation? How do you address that? Have there been particular partnerships with outside organizations that have been helpful? And where do you see the needs for your employees in the future?
So I have this, I don't know, call it a little dream in the back of my head, I guess, and that is that the first thing that was probably ever made on planet Earth by a caveman or a primitive human being was probably a wooden bowl. And somebody probably grabbed a rock and took a rock piece of wood and scraped a little bit out and went down to the river and grabbed some water. And in my mind, that's probably the first thing that was ever made. And here we are a couple million years later, and we're doing the same thing, just have a nicer rock. And we use a little bit more expensive wood, doesn't have any rock parts in it. I play this delicate balance all the time between figuring out what the absolute perfect piece of technology or machinery is to do the job, and a balance between that and what I can afford. And so in our business, we typically look out there at what other people are doing and then try and make it a little bit better. For example, we have a sawmill in our workshop, and I called the company up that makes it, and I said, we don't make lumber, we don't make 2x4s. I need a sawmill, but I need it to be specialized for what we do. And so I flew out to Kansas City, and I sat down with their engineers, and I said, I love the product that you guys make, but I need you to move this over here, and I need that over there, and I don't need this at all, but can you add one of these? And they said, sure, and they built it for us. And so I try all the time to figure out ways to do our job a little bit easier, a little bit better. We don't have any CNC equipment in our shop at the moment. Most of the machinery is pretty manual, but it's the fastest, most efficient way you can do it. I mean, we take a very traditional looking wood turning lathe, and we add vacuum chucks to them so that you don't have to sit there and turn a chuck key. You just flick a valve and it sucks the bowl onto the lathe. So we're doing things like that that are not super high tech. They're very manual. They're very proven. It works really well, but it's fast, and that seems to work really well for us. So we're definitely not on the low tech end of things, and we're not on the super high tech. Somewhere kind of in the middle, and it's reliable, which is nice.
So we partnered with a few people on training the Woodworkers Career Alliance, creating a structure essentially for our employees to progress. And it's a fair same sort of thing. So we're not on the super high end of tech. We're not completely manual either. But it was amazing putting up the structure, because it's like there's a chart, kind of like a Canva chart sort of thing. And what it is, it's the employee's name and the skills across. And essentially, what I thought it would be more of a tracking for me to find our gaps. But what it ended up being is that the employees want the most stickers on the chart. So it was and it became a little bit of a competition to be cross-trained in different positions and understand, there was two paths. There was one more operator and one more, quality and skill and things like that. So it was amazing that triggered that, and I didn't imagine that would happen at all. But the same boat is that the people are not only learning those skills, but they're also able to question why we're doing things. Same sort of thing. This whole the training and some of the training that's in place in the wood industry doesn't necessarily teach people the skills on troubleshooting and learning on the job. So like, again, BMAC gets involved and teaches them how to learn, how to see. That's been a huge help because instinctively, just growing up, some of us are born with that. And I remember setting up the mill with a group of engineers and things like that, and you'd ask, you're thinking about why do we process it that way? Why do we do it this way? Well, we've just always done it like that. And then you actually try to find the actual wood study or something that says why you're doing it, and it doesn't exist. It's because the competition did it that way. So as far as with training and bringing that all together and having that open culture, we've been able to, when people become more aware of the process and understanding it, we've had things that were literally $1,000 modification that increased production like 12 to 15%. So, it really, the training on the job and the understanding the process is huge as far as gains without the big investment.
I definitely agree. Cross-training is, especially in this climate with, employees are hard to find. Good employees are hard to find. Employment is low. Cross-training people so that they can do multiple things in the mill is incredibly important. They have to be able to run lots of equipment. We partnered with Vermont Tech, great school, great college. Generates some amazing people for some of the higher end things. One of the beauties though in the lumber industry now, I love gamers because everything, all our equipment is joystick, and kids get in this and it just, no problem. You get somebody who's gray hair like me, and I'm like, okay, all right. So, I think the industry has caught up too with what people are training on at home.
Never would have thought of that. There's a bunch of research that looks at the importance of diversity in management teams. Some of the data studies have been around investment funds, and teams of investment managers do much better when there's men and women and people with different backgrounds. And that's just where the math has gone really well. You've each talked about having this workforce participating in decision making. And Jennifer, your experience of an ultra-Canadian family grappling with the new generation coming in. Could you talk a little bit about how your business has benefited, or what opportunities you think you may need to pursue in the future to have the strength that you need, and any reflections you have on the industry in general and how we can do our best working together to bring the whole industry forward.
Okay. Oh, we're going to keep on going that way. Well, I guess the best way to describe it is that I'm not sure how many of people in the room deal with different cultures, but my case is that without giving the full story, is that our head office is in Quebec, and the Quebec tradition even across Canada is still very traditional management. I don't want to, there are a few that are progressive. So as far as dealing with the different cultures, I not only had that, but in addition to that, just as far as females in the industry, it's been an interesting experience. I remember going to buy equipment in North Carolina, and the guy panicked because there was no female washer. Like, it was just, unheard of that somebody with purchasing authority, was a female. But as far as the cultures and the mixes, it comes back to all cultures. We've got the same set of values. The respect, the trust, and the open communication. The best life lesson that I think I've had through this whole 6 years is open communication. That if there's some sort of they're difficult conversations, they're going to happen no matter what, and not letting it fester and keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger until there's an explosion. Dealing with it and learning how to have those difficult conversations has been huge as far as making sure that the company progresses, because there definitely was and still is some old school management where the theory is that, say something breaks on the machine and the operator messes up, a couple hundred square feet of flooring, that they should be disciplined. Let's look at the root cause and figure out and learn from our lessons and go from there. But as far as diversity at our mill, it's actually 3 females. They're my leadership team, and that's just by chance. We're 50-50 female to men. And we've got right from the 19-year-old to, I think our oldest employee is 62. So we've got the full range for sure, and it works out great.
I have a real challenge. If you go to the mills in the West Coast, the pellet mills in the West Coast, there's the production line end of it, and then there's the actual production of the person who's running the mill. And the person that's running the mill, they're taking moisture balance testing, they're doing bulk density testing, they're operating the boiler or burner, they're also checking chip moisture content, what the pellets are doing coming out. There's a myriad of things that all have to occur, and these tests are running all at the same time. Needless to say, women do a lot better job of that than men. So you go to the West Coast, and most of the mill operators are women. They're multitasking. The rest of the mill guys are, linear thinkers and doing the linear thing. Try and get a female to apply at a mill in Vermont. I don't know why. And we go out of our way, and we cannot. They just won't apply. I don't understand. So that's one of my biggest issues right now is trying to find it's a mindset. And I don't know why, but multitaskers do a much better job. Finding that multitasker is very hard for me. And so when you find it, you hold on to it.
But it's interesting because Ethan Allen once had a ton of women who worked in the mills, the furniture factories.
Okay.
And they did most of the finish work, the repair work and things like that for the same reason. But they always had a ton of women there. So that's interesting. You've had a hard time attracting them. It may be cultural for the region.
I'm pretty sure it is cultural in the region. I mean, it's frustrating to me.
And I would suggest, if you haven't already, reaching out to Vermont Works for Women, and really creating a pathway. So, often my experience has been, I hear all the time, is women need to be asked to be in a role that maybe is not traditional. I don't wait to be asked to do things, but I do know that there are a lot of women who do. And creating that pathway for mill operator jobs through Vermont Works for Women could be an answer. I was really happy to hear you say you like gamers, because I'm getting really frustrated with the students at Vermont Woodworking School. A lot of them are gamers, it seems now, which is challenging because they're not in the shop when they're supposed to be doing homework, and they're going to go get them, and they're playing a really great game of Fortnite that should not be interrupted. But it's good to know that there's I know, right? So that is interesting to me, but I also wanted to share that one of my challenges is that we're attracting people from all over the country to come to Vermont who want to learn furniture making. They are learning it. We're sending this next generation out. A lot of them dream of building a beautiful life, and they're going and they're doing that. And as Vermonters, now, a lot of them are piecing it together, and they're doing a lot of different things. And when they land in companies that are more manufacturing focused, they often don't last there because they're not given that sort of autonomy or that ability to really have a voice and be part of a community and be a valued member of that community. And so I'm encouraged by this conversation, and I'm curious. Also, I struggle with, should I be training people who are going to be more happy to be doing the same thing day in and day out to serve the industry, or is the industry evolving? So that's really a question for all of you. Because the top-down's not working for our students.
Yeah.
I think the industry's evolving. This is, and it's more from, like, I'm more flooring sector though, and that's like definitely an old boys club. And this past year, literally, I've gone to the conferences for 18 years, and the whole conference was exactly this topic. The whole conference, every subject was about essentially employees, retention, training, safety, that was it. Whereas before it was like, why does this wood explode? Or, things like, it totally shifted. And then not only that, but the focus of that association, it was employee engagement. The manufacturers group, same thing. I presented in Nashville to a group of manufacturers, literally 2 females in the room out of 100, and that was, and it's opening their eyes, and they're starting to realize with this labor crunch going on, what they're seeing is companies like ours, and like, why are you still getting all these employees? What is the difference? And then when you think back to years ago when other companies have gone through crunches and why they succeeded, like the Toyota incident, the example, is they succeeded through the crunch because of the people. So I think it's starting to click, but there's a lot of roadblocks, a lot of tradition that essentially it's change is hard. Change is hard for people to accept. But unfortunately, in this industry, we may come to a crisis or a crunch, or the business may be close to bankruptcy before somebody realizes what they've got to do.
Does your question also speak to the cross-training need?
Yes, I think it does. I think that it has to do with, are there jobs in the industry that my students want? Because it's not a question of whether or not they can do what it is that's required in manufacturing. It's whether or not they're going to be allowed to do a whole lot more. And they want to be feeling like they're growing and that they're evolving. But I'm also attracting, and that's also a question of maybe my students aren't your future employees, but are you finding the employees that are able to fit into what the demands are, and is the industry evolving to fit to the employees that are showing up?
So in our shop, we have some people that stand in front of one machine and just make one thing all day long, and that's all that we want them to do.
Right.
And that's what the job requires.
Yeah.
And we have a big chunk of our group that bounces around and does totally different things all day long, every day. I mean, one day they are cutting wood on a sawmill, and the next day they're welding. Mm-hmm. And it's that broad. And we try and cross-train them to do everything, and so that they're really diverse, that they really like it because it's not monotonous. But we do have a group of people, and it's made very clear up front that this is what this job involves, and it's you're turning bowls all day, every day, as long as you're here. And that's not really, we cross-train on sizes and styles and things like that, but you are working on a lathe all day long. And most of the 3 gentlemen that I have that are doing those jobs, that's what they want. They don't want to do anything else. They came here because that's what they want to do. So we have kind of a big mix, I guess I'd say. Half the group does one thing, and the other half has to be able to do everything.
I want to take a stab at this too. I decided really quickly after I started hiring people that I would never hire a home brewer for the brewery because the first couple of ones just bombed out. All I wanted to do was try something different. Can we do this differently? I'm like, no, we're making the same damn thing every day. That's the idea. But they're very happy when they go find a job at a brew pub where they need to make something new all the time.
Right.
And so I think it's really a question of how's the coaching for those people who come to you because they want to learn a craft.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily translate to a manufacturing environment,
Yeah.
but there's other parts of this sector that are craft.
Yeah.
And I think that's
really interesting that you bring that up, because if somebody applies in our shop and they have wood turning experience, I won't hire them. I don't care who they are. Same thing. And I don't, because then I have to break all of their habits and teach them how to do it the way I would like it to be done. So what we do for the wood turning jobs is I'm looking for really good workers. I'm looking for somebody that will come to me with ideas and say, hey, I was playing around at home and I made a bowl. What do you think of this design? And I want somebody who's, engaged in the work, and we actually have 4 quarterly meetings a year where I sit down with all of the employees for an hour, and we talk about how the business is doing, we talk about numbers, we talk about big events that are coming up, we talk about new machinery, we talk about what didn't work last quarter. And I want a team that, challenges me a little bit, pushes back on me and says, hey, why do we keep doing this, or can we do this? And but there's a tricky thing when it comes to the skill of what it is that we're doing. And I think it's the same thing that you were talking about, where when you hire somebody who thinks they're really good at something, you spend more time going back and forth about the way it should be done instead of just getting the job done. So that's a tricky challenge for you in the school side of it, I think, because you need to teach people and they need to learn, but you almost don't want to teach them.
Well, this also speaks to a theme that comes up a lot with entrepreneurs and coaching entrepreneurs, which is coachability. Like capital providers and funders and investors, they're looking at a bunch of different things, but one of the main things often we're looking at is coachability. That's another way of thinking about it.
Sure.
Well, I think knowing the background of somebody when you hire them, because sometimes we'll get applications from other competing companies and their culture is totally different. We just say that chances of that person fitting into our culture is really slim. And sometimes, we have some of our managers, we have about a 60-person staff in my division. Some of my managers like to hire experienced people because they don't think they're going to have to train them. And they end up having to train them more because you're breaking those bad habits versus a clean slate person who comes in and says, tell me how you want it done, and I'll do it that way. And I think a lot of times knowing that background of an individual is really important when it comes to law.
With timber framing, there's not a lot of people who have that skill as a traditional type of skill. So we ended up starting an apprentice program. And in the beginning, it was, yeah, sure, come on, we'll train you. And then after people kept leaving, I said, okay, come on, but it's a 2-year commitment before you, yeah, no, we're signing up, that's great. And they still kept leaving because there's something about the romance part of it. Yeah. I would imagine glass blowing would be a similar kind of thing, maybe wood bowl also, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that is so cool. I've always wanted to know how to do that. So I still end up spending tons of money training people just to have them leave after often about a year. And I've gotten very little productivity out of them at that point, because it does take quite a while.
Has there been anything that has worked, people that have stuck for whatever reason beyond that?
Just get lucky sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, not the trainee type level. I wouldn't be able to put my finger on that. It's some people just do take to it. They love the tools. They love the concept. So, but I'm going to say 1 in 5, 1 in 6 maybe are that person. So I do unfortunately have a fair amount of the low end turnover.
Lisa Henderson from UMac. Quite a few people know UMac and Maine and me. We, of course, work with a lot of different companies and hear a lot of different things. And the challenges that you're describing, and now with our workforce being so limited in availability, it's very challenging. What we have found is, and I'm hearing a little bit of this, not necessarily in these words, but the concept of competency, not necessarily technical competency to be able to do the actual function, such as working in lathe or certain skills, but competencies in other components about how people learn. And one of the things, and again, we have 2 people who work very closely with here, but the ability to help identify people who want to keep learning and who want to contribute back and can take some of those skills and introduce them back into the workforce. And all 3 of you have team members who are engaged in that way. And you've also worked with their strengths. I heard you talk about some of that in just different components. And I think it's kind of identifying your positions, thinking about the strengths you're looking for, not necessarily the very specific skills. Because if they have these strengths, you can teach the skills. And so the development of that, and the ability of that. And there's techniques, and we could go on for hours, and I'd be happy to do it, any of you. But what I'm hearing and what is happening and what we're learning more and seeing more companies do is just as Lauren said, I don't necessarily want to hire the home brewer. I want to hire people with certain innate competencies and abilities to develop so that they do work well in this role or this role or this role, and figuring what those strengths are that you want to look for.
I'd like to share one thing really quickly here that I think is relevant to you, and it might be for a lot of other people. When I was first getting started, the business had no money, obviously. It started, woodworking doesn't. And I wasn't able to pay the team very well. And so we started out with young people, and we were on the bottom end of the pay scale. After a couple of years, things got going. We implemented a similar system that my dad uses in the glass blowing side of things, which is we start out with a base pay rate. So you show up and you get paid an hourly rate. And then there's a piece rate bonus on top of that. And what we did is we sat down and figured out the math components behind it. And your overhead stays the same. In my case, I'll speak for me. The overhead for the business stays the same, but the more productivity you get out of it, the profitability of those pieces goes up exponentially. So it allowed us to sit down and figure out the pay scale part of it. And as soon as I figured that part of it out, the turnover slowed way down. And so I'm not saying that you don't pay your team well enough, but I'm just speaking for my particular situation. I think it's tricky when you've got, in my case, we have a bunch of younger males in the woodworking side of the shop, and you're competing with them making $20 an hour mowing lawns. And so once I figured that part of it out, it really calmed the turnover rate down a little bit, and it worked for me and it worked for them, and it kept them focused. I don't have to run around and say, put your phone down, stop texting somebody, because I basically say, if you want a pay raise, go ahead, it's on you. The system is set up now where if they want to make more money, they can. And if they want to text their girlfriend at lunch and take an extra 5 minutes, they can. And I don't have to manage that anymore. It takes a lot of the pressure side of it off of me, and it keeps them focused on what they want to do.
I've got a little bit of a different experience with that one.
Okay.
As far as the best way to describe it is that when I arrived there, I swear I had a person in my office every day asking for a pay raise. And it was who screamed the loudest at the raise. It's the structure that was there before I arrived. However, what started to happen is as we started to change the culture, people started to be happier. And it sounds unicorns, rainbows, I know. But anyways, people started to actually be more engaged. They started to become happier. But at the same time, the cool thing that we started to create was this culture of community, which I've heard this, where we do the cheesy potlucks. We do, breakfast. We do, things like that. And it started to become more family. And then what actually has happened is that it's actually us watching, minimum wage and the labor rates in the area and doing the increases. We haven't had anyone come and ask us for about 3 years for a raise. And just, and and it's they're fully engaged. They love their job.
And we try and do that as well. So I actually have a thing where I personally cook lunch for our entire company every Thursday. And that's just something that we started doing, and I don't think it'll ever stop now. And it's funny. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as sometimes it's really simple. It's like we cook hot dogs, on Thursday, and 1,300 people. No, in my company it's not that big. We have 16. So, it's really funny how that means a lot. And it's my way of saying, there's some days when I have to go up to somebody and say, hey, I know you really like doing what you're doing today, but I need you to do something else that you're not going to like very much. And at the end of the week, I say, hey, thank you very much, everybody, for doing what needed to get done. And it's great. They love it.
It's surprising how long or how far a little appreciation goes, and the sense of being part of something. That's, employees, we all want that.
Yeah.
Whether we're an employee or not. I mean, we want to be part of something and be appreciated for what we do.
I just want to talk about that just for a second. John Young, I joined the Vermont Training Program. I'll talk a little bit about that. So I get the pleasure of meeting roughly 200 employers a year across the state of Vermont. And so, I have all sorts of stories because I get to sit in with a lot of employers. And, there's an instance that I always use as a comparable is this company has told me that they're losing employees who need to travel 10 miles past them to work for a company for $2 less. And so, it's the culture, it's the culture, it's the culture. And I used to do a lot of business work in Burlington, and I would work with a couple different business advisors. And this one company said to this business advisor, yeah, we don't pay our people well enough. And the business advisor had been in there for a week, sort of seeing what was going on with their books, how their processes looked. And he said, that's correct. You don't pay your staff well enough to work here. Now, if those were in other places, it would probably be okay, but currently how you're operating things. And the other just anecdotal story, unfortunately, our oldest son moved to New Hampshire, which we didn't want. He works for a large energy company buying natural gas shares on the commodity market, which is pretty cool. He has a pension, which is unusual, all sorts of benefits. But the one he writes home about most is his company has a food truck come in, or a series of food trucks, every other Friday. The company pays half of the cost of the food truck. So if it's a $8 taco, the company pays $4 a taco. The company's not paying a lot of money for that service, and for a 24-year-old, that's the coolest, best thing ever. So it's not always a large amount of money. It could be cooking the dinner. It could be having the potlucks.
I mean, lunch costs us like $50 to $100 is what I spend a week, and it takes a group of individuals and makes them super happy. I can afford that. That's okay. You can do that for $100 a week.
Like,
Andrew mentioned meetings with employees, and we do a full company meeting every month. Usually it takes about 2 hours. And it keeps me, I'm there, we have 40 plus people. But they get to hear what's going on from me rather than down through the chain, and when it gets a couple levels down, the story has changed, and it's like, well, that's what he wants, So so that's how. We go through the safety stuff. Every department gets up and talks about what's going on in their world, and the people in production here's what sales are doing, and so it's okay. Well, some people get the glory of going to trade shows. Well, that's really about what's going on, but they hear, what's selling for the product and things like that. And that's, we've been doing that for, almost 20 years probably. But that's really valuable to us, is to have that communication. Some people say, well, gosh, that's a lot of time spent. It is, but that many people in the room for 2 hours. Think of the payroll you just burned. But
A lot easier than training new people every week.
yeah,
Yes.
and it doesn't, not everybody fully appreciates it, but it's just a way for everybody to kind of connect and be together.
It's really interesting. So I have a particular employee that I'm thinking of right now, and he worked in a woodworking company in Vermont, and the management came in and closed the doors instantly one day, and everybody got laid off. And he's so fearful of that happening again that he really wants to hear that things are doing well and going well. He wants to hear it from me. He doesn't want to hear it from somebody else. And that's exactly the same thing. And it's really interesting how some people have things from totally other businesses and other experiences that they carry with them when they come to you. And you have to work through that stuff too. And that's just part of the job. That's just,
They're all unique.
yeah.
I mean, every one of the employees is unique. I have 2 employees who are, I absolutely need them. I mean, the place doesn't run without these employees. And they're paid well. I can't pay them any more at this moment in time. So I called them in my office 6 months ago. I said, all right, guys, unlimited time off. Take as much time as you want, as long as you get your job. And it's been amazing. I mean, they are working harder now than they ever have. And I think it's because they in the back of their mind, they're thinking, I can take off any anytime I want. Well, they can't because they wouldn't get their job done. But also, they don't feel guilty if they are out doing something and, they're done with their work and they leave 15 minutes, half an hour early, an hour early. They don't feel guilty about that. They feel good about it. That they're not, they've done their job. Okay, I can go. It was sort of an experiment. Now, I can't do that with all my employees. But, those key people, it doesn't cost me really anything because the job is still getting done. They're salaried employees. But they just feel so much better about what they're doing and free to go home if they need to at that moment in time or when that extra time. It's been a pleasant surprise.
Family friendly wins you enormous benefits.
Yeah.
I had a woman who, personal issue, and I said, just take whatever time you need. Just didn't give her anything. She said, my last boss would ask me the first question, when are you going to be back? And I said, what's going on in your life is not going to make you productive here at work. Take care of it. And I think being flexible, and you lose sometimes because you get people who just take advantage of it. But that's a rare exception. And we found that having a flexible schedule, and our business allows that, and just saying, as long as you're getting your work done, we're good with that. Having that balance.
I do that with pretty much the whole team. The retail side of it's a little tricky because we have a retail store, and the store has to be open. And in that situation, we pretty much just say, please make sure somebody else can cover for you. But I kind of do this similar thing with the whole company. I haven't really pitched it to them that way, but if somebody comes to me and says, hey, can I not come in tomorrow, I usually say, sure, that's fine. And the team loves that.
At least the comment you made about figuring out who to hire, it dawned on me about I fired people for 40 years. And it dawned on me a few years ago, the single characteristic you want is natural curiosity. That somebody wants to learn, is interested, observant, passionate about what they're doing. And we've hired people come in and say, give me a cookbook. And they become terrible employees because they don't want to make any decisions. They want answers, they don't want any questions. And then you get people just constantly asking and curious. And you're always the best employees.
And I try and motivate that or accelerate that a little bit by letting people, I'll get guys that will say, hey, my lawnmower broke, can I go into the maintenance shop and fix it? I say, sure, go ahead. Because if you learn how to fix a lawnmower blade on your lawnmower, you're going to be able to fix a saw blade on my saw. And so we do that kind of stuff. And I think that that's a teachable, learnable, I think curiosity is something that you can teach. And
I haven't found that to be the case.
I think that it goes back to the cultural side of it. Like, I'm curious all the time, and I'm pushing those guys to be curious all the time. And maybe they don't ever get to be to the same level, but it gets people in that zone and thinking that way.
Well, I think what you have to do is reward them for asking questions.
Yeah.
That's the key to that.
Mike? Yeah.
There's a quote I heard a long time ago that I think works really well. You can trust people, or you can not trust people. You're going to be right 75% of the time. They're trusting them and taking that risk a little bit, because you get those in the middle, they're going to go with you, whatever you expect of them, one way or the other. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's a perfect no good deed goes unpunished, right? In a lot of those situations. But where I see a lot of employers that want to do good that sort of fall flat is we're too fair sometimes about our processes, and we're too fair about who we're going to promote or move into some of our positions, especially if it's not a real high-level position. And sometimes we look for volunteers instead of tapping somebody on the shoulder. And I think all of a sudden what that can happen is the other folks are mad because you asked for volunteers, this person volunteered, and you actually hired them to that position, and they all knew it just wasn't a good fit, and then you have a culture problem again. So I always encourage when I'm sitting down with employers, have somebody on the shoulder that you want to move in the direction because they show you the skills, the desire, the curiosities that you want. A business doesn't have to be a full democracy to be a happy business, right?
But sitting down with the employees on a regular basis is huge. Like as far as that one-on-one, the good people want feedback, and they want to know what the plan is for their path with your essentially that should be part of the discussion. And it's just a continuous, it's not annual, it's just a continuous loop. Like we think it's not an annual review, it's okay, there's time to do it. It just pull it in, doesn't have to be super formal, just stay in touch with them, what their plans are and what their interests are.
I think I heard all three of you say you practice some form of open book management. And in my experience working with companies, there's a lot of fear about doing that. But I think you spoke how beneficial it's been. Can you talk about how you transition to open book management and what is important to teach your employees so that it works well for you?
Yeah, I didn't transfer to open book management. I started it that way. And a lot of it is just kind of explaining to them the situation. I mean, what I try and do is I try and relate the business situation to their home situation. I say, okay, so you probably have a mortgage on your house. You probably have a lease on a car. I said, well, we have a mortgage on a building. And I finance a whole bunch of woodworking equipment. It's kind of the same thing. You have to live within your means. If we all work really hard and we have a really good year, either we pay down a little bit of that or we invest it into something else. And I try and relate it, the business side of it, as much to their personal home experience as I can, because I think it's more relevant. And the only difference is there's commas are in different places and there's more zeros. It's kind of this, I've just always done it that way. We've always talked about how sales are doing, what the expense side is, and if you're really open and honest about it, they appreciate it. They feel like they're being treated like an adult. And I try and parent the same way. I treat my kids as if they were adults, and then they act more like adults. And I don't think telling somebody to be quiet and hurry up and do their job it's not the way that my dad worked with our employees in our family business, and I've just always grown up around that. It's just worked for us.
I definitely had a transition. I came, the culture before was very closed. You don't share that information, especially where it was a private company. The way we started it was essentially once we had our key performance indicators, we made sure that it all related back to the profit of the company. And essentially before it was posted, it was explained and there was an education about it. But the neat part is that at that time we had the right people in place, and they were sponges, if anything like that. It was convincing the upper management side to share that information. Once it was shared, they started to notice that the direct correlation when we have a really bad batch of wood that should have been claimed or things like that, or bad kiln drawings, and they started to notice, and they started to become proactive in reporting problems like that to me instead of just putting their head down and getting through it. So it's been, once they understood the profit and what impacts it, they very quickly wanted to make that line go up. So it's been nothing but a positive experience sharing that with them. Again, it's a monthly meeting on Thursday, the first Thursday, and if I don't do it, I get in trouble by them. It's definitely, they want to know essentially how we're doing everything from sales to profit. Culturally, it's just not completely there in the wood industry, having that transparency of wood.
So I similar to you, I use terms that they will understand in their own home life, and trying to get them to understand the books a little bit. They understand. They catch on very quickly, but invariably I discovered. First thing they do is turn to profit share. What's the profit share at right now? I want to know exactly, how much money is in our profit share. Which kind of backfired on me when I decided to spend an inordinate amount on CapEx one year. And the profit share was at this level, and the next quarterly meeting, the profit share had gone down. And they wanted to know what the hell I was doing, spending their profit share. And, I had to backtrack and explain, now, look, it's an investment in the company, and that it comes out of the total of the company. And so what we're doing, and it was the eye-opening moment when I decided, okay, I have a board of directors, and then I got a board of directors. And these guys So, as much as it might be an eye-opener for employees, it was a big eye-opener for me. And I still, at this moment in time, if I have a large capital expense coming up, I go to the employees and ask them. I say, look, I want to buy this piece of equipment. It's going to affect us all. But by the same token, next year, this is the effect. This is the anticipated effect. God help me if it's not that.
On all of your books, have you also included your own owner's draw and made them aware of that, and or manager level salaries?
So in my situation, I don't hand out a copy of the financial statement to everybody. That's not, when I say open books, I talk high level about the company. I talk about what our sales are. I talk about percentage of growth. I talk about things like that. I don't get into specific salaries. I don't talk about, if somebody came to me privately and said, how much money do you make? I'd probably tell them. I think they'd be surprised at how little it is. They all think that just because you own the place, you're making a ton of money, and it's not always the case. I actually had a funny story. I had an employee who came to me and who was getting well paid, in my opinion. And I said to that individual, I said, I know how much you're making. I know that your wife is a teacher at the school district. I said, I'm going to take a guess, ballpark, at what she makes a year. And I put the two together. And I said, my wife doesn't work. Your combined family income is more than mine. And he was blown away. I said, so in my opinion, I don't think you have an income problem. You may have a spending problem. I don't think that's the case. And so we had that conversation. And so I don't get into super specifics unless people ask for them. If somebody says, how much did that machine cost? Happy to tell them. We talk about total sales for the year. I talk about, we have a line of credit. It goes up and down because our sales are very seasonal. We're definitely a fourth quarter business. So production runs flat all year long, and sales start out very slow, and then they go up, and if we've done it right, we have the right amount of inventory at the end of the year. So we have a line of credit that we draw on for the first half of the year and then pay it down in the second half of the year. We talked about that. But I don't hand them a sheet of paper that has every line item and every number on it, because I don't think it's helpful. They're not looking for that level of detail. They want to know that things are going in a good direction and that we're making good decisions and that things are going well, and that's what we talk about. And if they're not going well, we talk about that too. It's not always a fairy tale story. Sometimes we have bad months and we say, listen, we were supposed to do $100,000 in sales this month and we did 80, and that's not good. Let's get together and figure out how we rebound from that.
Yeah, and it's the same sort of thing as there's the key indicators, but it was chosen, there's a leadership group within the company, and those key performance indicators were chosen, and those people are employees. So they agreed, same thing, is that they don't need to know that level of detail. We want them to focus on what they have an impact on. So that's where we decided as a leadership group which indicators and profit is shown, but what ones that they can have an impact, because it's pretty discouraging to get level of detail like taxes or something like that, and then they start to get very tensed up about that.
They have no control.
Yeah, they have no control, so why stress them out about that? So it's the ones that they can help us. Well, for sure.
I go high level balance sheet, all the top line, full balance sheet, full P&L, top line, no, not individual line items, and GAAP cash flow. And then I usually have a chart showing our largest expenditures, so in a pie form, so that they can really visualize, because some of the guys are better visual learners than just a numbers base. So I usually, I like to have a pie chart or two that lets them see where our expenses are. But other than that, I do not, what a person makes is that's their own personal, and they should be private.
One thing that we talked about in our group recently that I think was the most impactful conversation we had was I explained to the team that when we have a workman's comp issue, that affects the company for the next 3 years. And a lot of them nobody had ever told them that. They didn't realize that, they thought that, okay, well, we pay out the claim and everything's done and it's over. They didn't realize that hangs on for 3 years, on your insurance side. And so that kind of information makes them think twice about, climb up a ladder too quickly or whatever they're doing in the shop. And that was really important. I mean, our quarterly meeting that we had, at the end of every meeting, we talked about safety and we talked about being careful. And most of the time, it's me asking them to say, guys, if I'm doing something in the shop that's not safe, handing a pair of safety glasses, because usually I'm the one that's running around really fast or I'm, doing stuff quickly. And oftentimes it's them going, hey, put your headphones on. Sorry, thank you. Okay. And it's a team effort. Everybody looks out for each other, and that's a really important for us.
Yes, as a sidebar to that, everybody's heard about the employee who's tripped over the doorstep on the way in and hurt their back after a long weekend. We went out, growing up on I had 1 foot in the woods, 1 foot in the farm. And on the farm, we always had a catastrophic insurance plan. And so the company took out a catastrophic insurance plan that will pay their deductible, 100% of their deductible if they get hurt at home. It's a cheap insurance. I mean, it's really inexpensive. But I don't have injuries in my legs. I mean, if they get hurt at home, they go to the hospital. They don't, and they know that they've got this there, and they come in and they apply with us if there's an issue. It's been really inexpensive, helpful, but it's a separate. It's not part of your health insurance. It's a separate policy you buy.
And we had to do something kind of interesting about injuries. So when our team is making bowls, their arm is very close to a piece of wood that's spinning at 800 RPM. And we've had a couple bowls that have come off the lathe and hit people in the arm. We had one guy get a broken arm, and we've had a couple people have to go in and get x-rays. And so we sat down as a group and we're like, what do we do to try and solve this? I mean, you have to be there. You can't do the job any other way. And so I went online and I found a company that makes ski racing, carbon fiber ski racing guards for gate skiers, for hitting gates out of the way. And so all the wood turners now on just their left arm wear a carbon fiber guard from ear to ear, and you can literally walk up with a steel hammer and hit it as hard as you want, and it doesn't hurt at all. You can't even feel it. And it costs like $120 each for each person, and it's like that collective group idea of just problem solving. So for $350 or whatever, we solve that issue from now on. Sometimes you just have to do stuff that's unusual and out of the box, and you think ski racing guards and wood turning go together. Sometimes you gotta just figure it out on your own because somebody else is doing it for you.
Chris, you said you have a board of directors.
Which one?
The governance one. And you did that because you had outside investors, right?
I did it because I needed it.
Did it because you needed it. So can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that and how you use them?
I was at a point where I needed, I was making decisions. I needed somebody to question my decisions. And so it started really as just a group that I started bouncing some ideas off. And it went into a formal, okay, now we have to meet. At this point, we're meeting yearly, and if there are issues going on, we meet more often. I present a high level numbers to them so they know exactly what's going on. And then I have to present the ideas that we're going through, and I have to back them up. I have to prove why it's important that I'm doing whatever I'm doing. We just bought this spring we bought new front end loaders, new excavator, all new equipment for the log yard. It was a big capital expense, but I had to present why that was cheaper than using the equipment that I had and continuing with essentially old equipment, why new was better. And by the end of it, they asked good questions, and by the end of it, the decision was made to purchase. But it's you work in sort of a vacuum, and I've always been a blue ocean marketing guy. So, and part of the blue ocean that I've been brought on with through my whole career, you do operate. You don't go to things like this very often. You don't go to industry events. You always run scared because you think the industry is doing better than you. You set your own bar. But in that vacuum, I don't have people to talk to. I don't to share. So having a board was really important to have someone who can share and also question what I'm doing. Why? It's incredibly important. And I find it stressful going into the meeting, but the stress is gone after the meeting. I mean, it becomes, everything I need to do becomes very clear.
Exact same scenario, but we have what's called a board of consultants. Dave is one of the people that is on it. And the thing is that personally, my motivation is always to be challenged. I like to have those challenges, and what was going on with the traditional structure being still around with parts of the company is that I needed that support to essentially go through exactly like whether it's capital projects or how we're managing or things like that. Those discussions occur at those meetings. If I'm having some difficulty with like cross training was a big controversy, believe it or not, in the beginning, and having that support and from the outside industry to be able to explain that hey, this is actually a good thing was definitely needed. I also, just for my own professional development and for my state of mind, I do the full presentation also of the financials to this group, and more so that they question me to make sure that there's not things that are missed. I want to be challenged. I want to be questioned on why things are occurring and keep me on my toes. Is why we have that set up.
In my situation, when I first started out, it was kind of, when I first started my business, it was like me and 2 employees. It didn't really need a whole board or anything like that. We're at the point now where we have kind of an informal advisory group. It's made up of myself, John, who's my head of sales, my dad, and Jay, who is now the CEO of Simon Pierce. He actually started out helping me with my business, and that's how him and my dad met, and now he's running my dad's company. And my bookkeeper. And so that group of us, we get together every month, and we review last month full P&L. We meet every single month and go through things, and they ask me why things are happening, what's going on. It's a way for all of us to kind of just stay on the same page. And sometimes it's a very short meeting and everything's good, and sometimes it's a long meeting because we want to, similar to what you were saying, like there's a big capital expense, or sometimes it's, the inventory numbers don't make sense, or the margin is way off, and what's going on with that. So, and it's the same thing. It's getting that feedback. I'm in a wood shop all day, and we're running around problem solving little things, and sometimes we have to stop and say, are we on the right trajectory?
So we're just about at time. I want to close by mentioning that the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund has a business assistance program that we spent time talking about how you develop the employee that program spends time on how do you develop the entrepreneur. And in some cases with funding from John to help lower the cost, and the group of coaches, we've got a couple of different approaches. We bring in a coach to work directly and help connect to the other resources that are available in the state. We have peer-to-peer collaborative, which is kind of a advisory board on training wheels, if you will, to work for a year to get to a full advisory board. And there's a bunch of other resources that are available out there. And the Sustainable Jobs Fund includes the forest products industry as a specific market target that they are required, enabled by statute to serve. And Jeff Robertson has a booth out there. But going back to Chris's opening comments, there are resources out there. Not all of them are free, but the whole ecosystem is there to work with you when needed. And thank you particularly for you guys showing so strongly. Thank you all.
Well,